Hey, what's up, guys? Let's check out this game by the great attacking player Alexander Alekhine. In this game, Alekhine has the black pieces. His opponent with the white pieces was Torres, famous contemporary of his. So Torres here plays e4 and Alekhine plays e5. We've got knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, so Roy Lopez. A6, bishop a4, knight f6, 0-0, and now different ways that black could play. Knight takes e4 would be the open Spanish or open Roy Lopez. Bishop b7, probably the most common move in the position. b5, of course, is also playable, but not quite as common. But here, Alekhine decided to play d6. Okay. White continues with bishop takes knight, a move that Alekhine said was not the best move. In his notes to the game, he gave a few alternatives for white. For instance, the very simple just queen e2, defending this pawn. This is kind of like the Worrall variation. And then typical Spanish things could happen from here. Bishop b3, possibly d3, maybe c3, and knight d2 kind of stuff. Another possibility he gave in his notes was playing, for instance, c3, allowing for knight takes e4, because after pawn d4, white gets a really nice initiative in the center in exchange for the pawn. Even if, for instance, black plays f5 in order to hold on to the knight, well, white can continue with pawn takes, and it's just a very pleasant game from white's perspective. For instance, if pawn takes here, the pin on the c6 knight allows for knight takes e5, and already white just has quite a bit of initiative there. Okay, and so another suggestion in his notes to the game, instead of bishop takes knight, was the move rook e1, a sort of a mature move. And now, for instance, if b5, bishop b3, knight a5, d4 again is a strong move here. If nx b3, ax b3, black could play bishop b7, but once again, white has pawn takes on e5, and white will have a little initiative here as well. Okay, in any case, in the game after d6, bishop takes c6 was played, and pawn takes back, and now white continued with d4. Okay, here Alekhine took the pawn on e4, and after rook e1, he played the move f5. Now everything is a little different because there's already this pawn on c6. After dx e5, what would you play here if you were black? Well, Alekhine played pawn d5, protecting this knight in the center of the board, establishing a really strong central knight. And already, black has some prospects for an interesting dynamic game. He's got the bishop pair. Maybe he'll point these at the king somehow. And, okay, this pawn maybe could be a little weak someday. So after knight d4, bishop c5 was played, and now c3. You might be wondering, wait a second, isn't this knight hitting the c6 pawn that's undefended? Well, yes, but if knight takes e6, then Alekhine would have played bishop takes f2 check. Not only does this win a pawn, but whichever way the king goes, for instance, if king h1 or f1, either way, black's next move will be queen h4. And, well, here there's a really big threat, which is knight g3 checkmate, because the pawn on h2 is pinned. So rook takes would be forced. And after, for instance, fx e4, the attack just continues. And black is already looking at a really big advantage. Okay. So that's why knight takes c6 was not played. Instead, c3, defending the knight on d4. And now 0-0, f4, holding on to the knight. It would have been possible to play f3 to kick this knight away. Sort of reminds me of certain variations in the two knights, or the Scotch Gambit. Something like f3, and if you were to run away to g5, then maybe f4 again, then the knight comes back. And the difference here is that in this position, it's white's turn to move here. If you compare that with the game, after f4 right away, it's the same position, but now it's black's turn. So that's a little subtlety there that white could have maybe used. But okay, here we are, and now Alekhine played the move queen e8. It's an interesting idea. He wants to bring the queen to the king side, possibly to g6, possibly to h5, in order to put pressure against white's king, which is looking increasingly under-defended, with all of white's pieces still over here undeveloped on the back rank on the queen side. So white tries to address that by playing bishop e3, developing a piece, and also answering this pressure on this diagonal here. Sorry, that was not played in the game. This pressure along this diagonal is a little bit of a nuisance for white, and so bishop e3 is a nice move that responds to that. So now bishop b6, anchoring the bishop on a pawn, so that if the knight were to move away someday, it would not be revealing a bishop, hitting a bishop in space. And now knight d2. Here, simply completing development with bishop b7, and you can already start to see both of these bishops are pointed at white's king side. Of course, there is a lot of traffic in the middle of the chessboard here, but they are perfectly placed for an attack. All right, knight f3, now a logical move, and here rook d8, further centralization. All of black's pieces are playing now. Okay, queen c2, a logical move. And here, Alekhine engages in a little maneuver that's similar to the one we looked at earlier with f3 and f4. He plays this move c5, attacking the knight on d4, which runs away to b3, and then he plays c4, attacking the knight again, and the knight returns to d4. It's important to note this move c4 is possible because a bishop takes b6 would fail to c takes b3 when our pawn hits the queen and this pawn hits the bishop. So if white saves the queen, we win the bishop, and if white saves the bishop, we win the queen. And so for that reason, bx b6 was not possible. White had to return to d4 with the knight. Okay, but now comes c5, and the knight is kicked once again, this time back to e2. And so Alekhine was able to advance these two pawns considerably up the board, gaining tempos off from this knight with each move. A really nice strategic idea. If we back it up and look at it again really quickly here, you can see both of these pawns are back here on c6 and c7, and a few moves later we have c5, knight b3, c4, knight d4, c5, and knight e2. These pawns have managed to advance all the way up the board to c4 and c5, and white has not done much other than move this knight back and forth a few times. Okay, and here, queen c6. It's an interesting move, I think, played not so much to create these kinds of threats against the king, but also potentially looking at transferring the queen over here to g6. This move, queen c6, has both of those ideas. Okay, so rook ad1, centralization, and now h6. h6 is a very strong move. Black has this plan. He wants to play king h8, rook g8, and then g5. Getting the king out of the way, putting the rook behind the pawn, and cracking open this pawn chain here with g5, which would create an open line to white's king in order for the pieces to come flooding around the king side and attack. So rook f1 is played. And here, king h8, simply continuing with that strategy we just talked about. Rook g8, g5 are certainly ideas. After this move, king h1, now Alekhine plays the move queen g6. So he still is thinking about maybe someday playing rook g8 and g5, but now has introduced an additional attacking resource which is queen h5. This would make this pawn push even stronger, because with the king on h1 now, if the pawn were to get down the board, for instance, to g3, there would be pressure against the h2 pawn. So queen g6 is very, very good attacking move. All right, now, knight g1. It's an unusual looking move, but you might wonder, okay, why would white play it? Well, the idea behind this move is to respond to the attacking strategy we've been talking about. If white plays knight h3, then both of these knights will have an iron clamp on the g5 square, together with the pawn and the bishop on e3. Sorry, the bishop on e3. And so in this way, black will not be able to continue with that strategy that we talked about. Rook g8, queen h5, and g5. And so knight g1, even though it's a somewhat strange looking move, it has this plan of playing knight h3 and just clamping down on the g5 square. Alekhine continues with queen h5 anyway, and now after knight h3, white has successfully defended against this big break that black was planning. However, this move allows for a smashing attack back in the center of the board with d4. This very strong move opens up the deadly diagonal to white's king. There's a whole bunch of exchanges that now will happen on d4. Certainly Alekhine saw all of these. After c takes d4, c takes d4, the best move for white here would be to simply retreat to bishop g1, which would leave black with a really pretty pawn duo here. Although, you know, arguably maybe white could still continue to hold on, but this pawn is very dangerous looking. But in the game, white decided to take on this square because, after all, he is attacking this square more times than it's defended. So he played bishop takes. And now after bishop takes, rook takes, knight takes, it seems as though black has lost a pawn, right? White was controlling that square, and that's the square that black tried to break through on. Certainly white has an extra pawn. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns for white versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for black. And so, you know, did Alekhine just miss this? Did he not count? Well, it turns out he did see all of this and was anticipating this exact position to occur when he played the move d4. And here he has a really strong attack. See if you can guess what move Alekhine played. Well, you probably were thinking about this queen sacrifice earlier, and here, yeah, it works. Queen x h3 check. I mean, with the bishop on this diagonal, it's really begging to be played. And here, if pawn takes, which is what happened in the game, there's actually a checkmate in only 2 moves. See if you can spot the checkmate in 2. That's right, it's knight f2 check, king g1, and knight takes h3 checkmate. A really beautiful checkmate. The knight is involved in taking over the dark squares. The light squared bishop controls the light squares. And all of this was foreseen by Alekhine when he played the pawn break d4. Yeah, sort of appreciating the beauty of this combination, I think really starts with understanding way back here his plan of king h8, rook g8 followed by g5, white understanding that plan, trying to stop it by playing king h1, knight g1, knight h3, succeeding in stopping that plan, but just falling victim to another d4, and after takes, massive exchange of pieces on the d4 square, followed by this beautiful queen sacrifice, pawn takes, nf2 check, king g1, knight takes h3, checkmate. Incredible checkmate. I hope you guys enjoyed this game as much as I did.